On February 8, 2017, Connie Van Oosten walked into First Trust and Savings Bank in Albany, Illinois, and asked for $350,000 out of her own account. Then Connie slipped a note to the teller that said her and her husband were being held against their will. The teller suggested she stay there, but she was afraid her husband would be killed if she didn't return with the check. Once she left the bank, the teller called 911 and investigators would soon uncover a convoluted plan to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to cover for a lifetime of fraud. This is Monsters. Chad Schipper was born on January 16, 1977, making him 39 days older than yours truly. He grew up in Erie, Illinois, and was known as an intelligent kid. He was the valedictorian of his graduating class at Erie High School. He ended up at Western Illinois University, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree in business management. He started attending a Bible study group at a different college where he would end up meeting his wife. The Moes were originally from the Bay Area in California, but a job transfer took them to Northwest Illinois. Randon Mose attended Black Hawk College about 30 minutes west of Erie, and she knew her sister Danielle was looking to meet new people, so she suggested she attend the Bible study group at her college. In the late 90s, Chad showed up to the group while Danielle had already been a member for some time. Danielle was immediately drawn to him, and soon the two were dating. They began spending all of their time together, and family members noticed how much Danielle lit up any time she talked about Chad. They let their relationship develop slowly, learning that they each wanted the same things out of life, focusing on love, faith, and family. The couple got married in 1999. Chad was working as the manager of a gas station, and Danielle took care of the home. That would eventually include 6 children. Danielle focused all of her energy on raising the children, but that didn't mean Chad wasn't an active part of their lives, at least in the beginning. He participated in school projects and soccer games. He worked hard to provide for the family, but he also made sure to take time to spend with the family.
I worked at a gas station before that. I was a manager. Lost that job.
Which one?
Shell station in Hillsdale. I was there for 9 years or so. And I got along with the manager. And they let me go and started out very principled going home, and I just fell into depression. Wasn't doing anything. So my boss there put up with me for a long time. And I just, family and friends tried to keep up. I still had that job. I had some apartment complex I had bought on contract, so that was our sole income really, trying to stretch that. Sold some properties here and there, properties that got big ideas and then they just get underwater. I owe more than they're worth and don't know where to go.
You need a lot of properties. You mentioned the 7 or 8 plus 7 there.
2 in Geneseo and 2 in Erie and 1 in Bowling. The one in Bowling took a loan out of my other property, which didn't have a loan on it. Geneseo bought my sister's house so that she could sell it and buy her house in Erie. Then I meant to fix up my sister's house.
He started his own business, Schipper Financial Services LLC, and with a lucrative career as a financial advisor, Chad was able to buy a larger house in Erie. Chad was thought to be good at his job, and his clients seemed to trust his advice. The long hours weren't a problem at first, but it eventually started to put a strain on the marriage. Then one night, Chad came home and told Danielle he had a confession. He said he had done something in the past that he was ashamed of. He told her that, years prior, he had a sexual encounter with a man in a public restroom. He had not cheated on her. The encounter was long before they had ever met, but he couldn't hide it from her any longer. He explained that he thought he could bury it, but he realized he couldn't and needed to tell her. Danielle had a difficult time accepting the confession, and the couple ended up in marriage counseling. After some time, Danielle chose to accept what Chad had done and rebuild their marriage, something that she believed would renew her trust in him, but it wouldn't take long for Chad to betray that trust. As Chad's business grew, his time with his family slipped away. He spent more time in early morning meetings and late nights crunching numbers. Even when he was with his family, his mind was on his clients and the deals he was making. Their relationship was taking a backseat to their income, and one could argue that that meant they at least didn't have to worry about money, but that would also end up not to be true. Chad's business began struggling, and of course, he tried to keep that hidden. Danielle wasn't aware that their finances were in jeopardy at first, but eventually it became obvious. Unpaid bills started showing up, and Chad started missing meetings. His investments became riskier, which only damaged his financial situation more in the long run. He began taking out loans to cover his debts and even started borrowing money from friends and family. His anxiety increased, and he became even more distant from his wife. When Danielle fully learned about Chad's business failures, she wasn't sure how to fix them, but she never imagined how far Chad would go in order to reverse his failures. At first, Chad tried to make up the money by investing in real estate. He would buy a distressed property, fix it up, and then rent it out. Of course, real estate and construction are not without risks, and owning and managing rentals can be time-consuming. Danielle wasn't involved in any of the real estate and didn't know much about the financial aspect. She knew that Chad was spending even more time away from the house, staying out later and later into the night. He would come home and tell her there was a problem at one of the properties, but there's no way to know what he may have actually been doing. Larry Van Oosten grew up in Erie, Illinois, just like Chad, but he was from an earlier generation. He attended Western Illinois University, where he met Connie in 1969. After they married, they bought the farm that Larry's father had worked for 50 years and settled into life in small-town America. They didn't farm the land themselves, they leased it to a neighbor. Larry ended up opening his own pest control business while Connie worked for the local lumber yard before also opening a business. She operated a floor covering store for a while, but was offered a job as a sales rep for a carpet factory, and she took it. They had 2 children together, and after 30 years operating the pest control business, Larry retired, with Connie following soon after. The Van Oostens attended Erie Christian Church, which Chad had been going to since he was a kid. Larry and Connie ran the Sunday school program and were known to own multiple businesses, being fairly successful with them. When the Van Oostens sold a business in the mid-2010s, their sudden windfall became an interest to many around them. One of them was Chad.
I had asked Larry and Connie for money a few years back. I felt that it had helped me out then, and he's been different.
What did you ask him for?
I put together a binder. $100,000, I believe. I don't remember.
Was that towards investments? Was that a loan?
That was a loan to fix other properties and to keep going, so it's an income coming on.
Did they entertain your plan, or did they just treat it flat?
I could tell right away they weren't going to do anything. They might have waited a day. I don't remember.
Chad talked to the Van Oostens about investing with him, presenting them with a proposal for a loan to fix up his properties, but they ended up turning him down. They would later say it was not personal, they just didn't feel like his proposal would be beneficial enough to them. Chad tried to move on from the rejection, continuing to struggle with his investments for the next few years. Then his situation deteriorated when Danielle's grandmother asked for money and Chad panicked.
Obviously, we talked to your wife. She mentioned something about a trip to Kansas that you guys had taken.
Yes.
On Monday. You got back.
Wait. Okay.
So I guess what happened from there? That's basically when all this chaos kicked off, wasn't it?
That was funds that my uncle wanted from my grandmother. which I had already spent, and so I was trying to figure out a way to get it together.
So part of pushed you into
So
this.
pushed it over the end.
So that was funds from your grandmother that your uncle wanted.
Yeah.
You already
He's a power attorney or something.
you already had spent that money.
Yeah.
So how did you get him a check?
I mailed him a check, and then I didn't sign it. So I honestly didn't do that on purpose. I was just trying to buy time. I mailed him a check, and I honestly just didn't sign it. So I went down there and signed it. And that's when I knew I had to come up with some way of reversing the funds, because he was going to sue me. For the money I had.
So they kind of kicked off a sense of urgency for this. You said it was $308,000.
Yeah.
So that check that you gave was no good. Right. What you signed.
It was the grandmother's own money which she had given to Chad to invest, but he spent it. He claimed he had sent a check for $308,000 to Danielle's uncle, who acted as the grandmother's lawyer, but he had legitimately forgot to sign the check. Now, that's likely bullshit, as he knew he didn't have the funds in the account to cover the check and wanted to delay the transaction. Once they went out to Kansas so Chad could sign the check, Chad believed he needed to take drastic action in order to make sure the check would clear. At some point prior to the abduction, Chad prepared a space to hold his captives as well as tools and weapons. He had texted his own daughter and asked her to wrap electrical tape around the bright yellow handle of a sledgehammer so that no yellow was showing. Grace would later say that she thought it was a strange request, but she did the best she could and soon sent her father a picture of a completely black sledgehammer. He had also gone to work modifying one of the vacant properties he owned. That was a house that he was supposed to be fixing up to either sell or rent out, but photos collected by police showed it to be in a pretty sad state. Now, I worked in residential remodeling for decades before becoming a content creator, and I can't tell you how many projects I've walked into in this state, and it's never a good sign. When random crap is scattered everywhere, it's a sign that there's not a good plan in place to get the property renovated in a timely and efficient manner. That means the renovation will cost more money because it creates more waste, and the extended timeline will mean the investor is paying the mortgage out of their own pocket. Looking at the state of his project makes it very understandable as to why his investments weren't paying off. It also looked like he was living there at least part-time. He had a bed, a television with cable, and a DVD player with movies. He had food and toiletries, and there was also a substantial collection of sex toys. And I mean, it was a lot. In one bedroom there was some sort of leather harness, and in another bedroom the bed had restraints for wrists and ankles. I honestly don't think they were part of the crime against the Van Oostens, and seems more like Chad was either having a sexual relationship or planning to have a sexual relationship with someone other than his wife. Investigators would later find various loose condoms in his car, and sure, he could have been using them with his wife if they had decided 6 was enough kids, but then why would they be in his car? The late nights that Chad was spending away from the home were clearly not from him working. The most important part of his modifications was to seal off a section of the basement. It would become the cell that he would hold his victims captive in. On February 7, 2017, Chad left the Schipper residence early in the morning. He headed to his other property where he kept another car that his family had no knowledge of. He collected his supplies, which included a gun, 2 tasers with extra cartridges, a mask, gloves, and a voice changer. Then he realized that he had left the sledgehammer at his house, so he drove back there to get it. He believed his family would still be asleep, but his son actually saw the strange vehicle, which he would bring up to his father later. The worst part is that the only reason Chad was bringing the sledgehammer in the first place was to break a window at the Van Oostens' house. In no way do you need something like that to break a window. In photos of his belongings, you can see that he had a regular hammer in the secret vehicle and a small pry bar in his regular vehicle, both more than enough to break a pane of glass. In the investment property, there was also a large padlock and some scraps of 2x4 lumber, or he could have just grabbed a medium-sized rock. A sledgehammer to break a window is some serious overkill. Still, he believed he needed it, so after picking it up, he drove to the Van Oostens' residence, saying he arrived at around 3:30 in the morning. He used the sledgehammer to break a basement window, then waited in their house for hours. Larry would later describe waking up at about 7 a.m. and seeing a man dressed in black with a mask on standing in the bedroom. Before he had time to think about what was happening, Chad shot him with one of the tasers. Larry and Connie slept in separate bedrooms, and when he woke Connie up, Chad said through his voice changer, quote, "Where is your God now?" That was likely something he chose to do to make it seem like the perpetrator was not a Christian, essentially throwing suspicion off of himself. Then he led Connie into the other bedroom and had her handcuff Larry before putting duct tape over their eyes and mouth. At one point, he brought Connie out of the bedroom, removed the tape from her eyes and mouth, and had her write down all of their financial information. He said he wanted bank accounts with how much was in them. He wanted to know if they had any other property. He had Connie bring them their wallets, and he had her sign some papers. She would later say they looked like promissory notes. He pulled his vehicle into their garage and loaded both Larry and Connie into the trunk. They would later say that the drive was about 30 minutes. He got the Van Oostens into his modified investment property and got them into the sealed-off cell. He had gone back to their house later that day and parked their vehicle behind an abandoned house in the neighborhood. Like many dumb criminals, Chad had put in the work to abduct and hold the Van Oostens captive, but he hadn't seemed to have worked out exactly how he was going to get their money.
My initial thought that I was going to do this either, I guess, was to do an internal transfer from their account to my account, have them sign some paperwork that said it was they were loaning me money.
So he claimed that he had thought about having them sign something that said it was a loan, but he hadn't only thought about it. He had made Connie sign a promissory note before he took them from their house. Did he believe that having paperwork that claimed it was a loan would stop him from being arrested for kidnap and theft? That was one of the first details that indicated that Chad was not planning to let the couple live. He was going to transfer the money and then the Van Oostens would disappear. When the bank transfer was discovered, he would present the promissory note and the authorities would accept that as proof he wasn't involved. Of course, that wouldn't have happened and he would have been caught, but that would mean Larry and Connie were dead and Connie wasn't planning to let that happen.
So that was my initial thoughts of doing some kind of transfer to my account. And then it was Connie who mentioned that she would go actually to the bank and pick it up and grab it, and that seemed to be better. If I used the term the storage, they wouldn't know what that means, and if they didn't look into it, it might be okay.
Connie literally outsmarted Chad. She suggested she go to the bank and get a cashier's check, so that's what they did. Chad blindfolded Connie and drove her to First Trust and Savings Bank in Albany, Illinois, where he told her that he would kill Larry if she did not return with a check for $350,000. And in the end, she did, but he didn't consider what else she would do while in the bank. Connie pulled a piece of paper from her purse and wrote a note for the teller. It simply read, quote, "We are being held at gunpoint. Please help us." The teller suggested that Connie stay in the bank while she alerted the police, but Connie declined, saying the man was going to hurt her husband if she didn't return with the check. The teller printed the cashier's check, made out to Store Edge LLC, and handed it to Connie so she could leave and ensure Larry was safe. Then the teller notified the authorities. The Whiteside County Sheriff's Office arrived at the bank first, and when they saw the note, they called the Illinois State Police. The first thing the authorities did was rush to the Van Oostens' residence to check on their welfare. They arrived and didn't find the couple there, but they did find the little paper dots that are released by a taser cartridge when it's fired. Those are built into the cartridge to act as an identifier in the event a taser is used in the commission of a crime. Seeing that the couple had clearly been taken by force, they began investigating their disappearance. The two immediate leads they had were footage on the bank's surveillance of an early 90s Chevy Caprice driving by immediately after Connie left and the name that had been written on the check, Store Edge LLC. A quick search of local business registration showed that Store Edge was operated by Chad Schipper. When a background check was done on Chad, he had a clean record, but the Department of Motor Vehicles did show that he was the registered owner of a 1992 Chevy Caprice. With that, it was safe to say that Chad was the lead suspect. Of course, the records also showed that Chad owned multiple properties, so the authorities had surveillance put on each one. They didn't know where the Van Oostens were being held, and alerting Chad of their presence could get them killed if they hadn't been already. But then, Chad landed right in their lap. While investigators were searching Larry and Connie's home, they saw the Chevy Caprice drive by. A deputy jumped in a cruiser and pulled the vehicle over, but just after stopping on the side of the road, Chad took off and led law enforcement on a high-speed chase. It ended when Chad swerved into the other lane and hit a vehicle coming in the other direction. The driver of that vehicle was not seriously injured, and Chad was taken to the hospital where he was treated for a dislocated right elbow, a couple of broken ribs, and some minor internal injuries. Once Chad was in recovery, detectives questioned him and he immediately confessed to what he had done. He told them that he was keeping the Van Oostens at his investment property in Geneseo, and he claimed that he was intending to take them back home. He said that he had hidden his identity and always used the voice changer so they didn't know who he was. He told the detectives about the trip to the bank and then bringing Connie back to the property. He told them that he was planning to go to the Van Oostens' house that day to clean up the broken window and get Larry's CPAP machine, and that's when he saw police at the house. When a detective asked him why he hadn't already let them go, he said he was planning to get more money from them. It was the same thing he told a detective during his recorded interrogation on February 13th.
And you mentioned to us on the hospital interview that you were trying to get more money from them as well. You were going to hold on to them for a couple of days.
I did, if possible. They didn't know how quickly things would go with this other gentleman, so the urgent thing was to cover my grandmother's check, but if I could get out from underwater some of these other properties, and that was what my hope was. And then my hope was to tell them the master plan that these people that are hiring me to do this, I'm going to get there one day, and someday, I don't know how soon, there'll be money on your doorstep. It'll be for me to replace what was taken with interest, and how I justify things about it. And I was going to leave them alone.
So your intent was never to flee the country or put an offshore account?
No.
Did you think that the LLC that you put it in, did you think that was a way for us tracking you? Were you worried about that at all?
I knew that it could be. Like, if they wanted to look into it, I knew I could. I was only just thinking about the moment and getting the money taken care of, and worry about other stuff as it went on.
During that interview, Chad told the investigators where the Van Oostens were being held, but he didn't say anything about the room being hidden. When authorities arrived at the property, they cleared the house and didn't find the captives. The house was in complete disarray and there was a ton of evidence, but not the Van Oostens. What they did find was a bedroom with a television screen that was displaying video feeds from 4 surveillance cameras. It was a room with no doors, and there was a mattress on the floor with 2 bodies laying on it, covered with blankets. The bodies were not moving. They weren't sure where the feed was coming from. If it was hooked up to the internet, it could be in a completely different location. That's when one investigator noticed the basement seemed off. The basement took up the entire footprint of the house, except for one corner that was walled off, and the construction seemed too new. As they were looking around for a way to access the space, another officer found a trap door in a bedroom closet. When he lifted the plywood, underneath was a steel door with a padlock on it. They cut the lock and opened the steel door to find a ladder leading down to a soundproofed cell. Inside they found Larry and Connie, still alive, unharmed physically but worn out from a chaotic and terrifying ordeal. The cell had a toilet, a sink, and a shower. There were towels so the couple could bathe. There was toothpaste and toothbrushes. There was a stack of food that consisted of ramen, granola bars, nuts, applesauce, and pudding. There was also entertainment in the form of some books, including a Bible and DVDs of the television shows Smallville, The Dukes of Hazzard, Home Improvement, and Deal or No Deal. On the walls were brackets with handcuffs attached, and it would be learned that Chad had handcuffed the couple standing against the wall for hours at a time. On February 13, 2017, Chad was interrogated again at the sheriff's department, where he continued to claim he was going to eventually release the Van Oostens, but nobody believed him.
The stuff you had in your car, this rolls of duct tape.
Okay.
Can you explain
I was
that
going, the plastic, I was going to fix that up window. It was in the basement.
Obviously,
There was-
we think this it throws a red flag for us.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean by that?
Not really.
A lot of bodies are after this.
Okay. No, I just wanted to fix the window so that if any of the kids asked about it or saw it, they could tell them over the phone that, when you broke them, we'll fix it.
According to Chad, he had a 10-foot by 25-foot or 3-meter by 7.5-meter roll of 3mm plastic sheeting so he could cover a single basement window. That seemed unlikely. First, Connie told investigators that she asked the man, who they didn't know was Chad at the time, why he was doing what he was doing, and she said he responded with no emotion, quote, "I'm going to keep you until I get all of your money, and then I have to kill you." On top of that, his plan did not benefit him in any way if they remained alive. The only way he had any chance of getting away with the theft was if Larry and Connie Van Oosten disappeared. It was also very clear that Chad had not decided to carry out the crime in the last few days because of the check to Danielle's grandmother. He had prepared for it for months. The construction of the room, the stockpiling of food. He was a prolific note-taker, and investigators found notes that described his plans in his investment property. It looked like he had a list of everyone he owed money to. He had a list of exactly how he was going to carry out the abduction. Some looked like scripts for his victims to call people regarding their bank accounts or to call their children and tell them they would be out of town. It was a calculated plan, and just hoping he wouldn't get caught after releasing his victims was not part of it. Connie saved her and her husband's lives by coming up with a way to outsmart Chad and get a note to the bank teller, something that Chad still didn't know about.
I guess, may I ask what, if you don't mind telling me, what was your first indication something was wrong, or somebody knows about the window or something?
I just keep missing. Yeah, we were suspicious.
Some unusual patterns of communication from the children.
Sure.
The investigator lied and said the Van Oostens' kids had reported them missing, likely to keep that little piece of evidence in his back pocket in case he needed it at a later time. But it doesn't sound like he did. After Chad's arrest, Danielle went into his office, a place she wasn't usually allowed. In there, the extent of Chad's financial failures was finally revealed, and they were much worse than anyone could have imagined. It was discovered that Chad was terrible at investing money. Because of that, he had buried himself in debt through credit cards and loans. When that wasn't enough, he began embezzling from his clients, such as his wife's grandmother. He had gotten credit cards in his parents' names and forged documents to borrow money against their house, which they believed was paid off. As Danielle began learning that her husband was not the man she thought he was, he used that vulnerability to try and manipulate her from jail. He began writing letters to Danielle, at first just seeming to be asking for forgiveness. He promised her that he could change and be a better man. He said that he wanted to rebuild their relationship once he was released from prison. But he wasn't genuinely asking for forgiveness. He was looking to create an image to make himself look like less of a monster. He had initially pleaded not guilty, and I think he wanted to use his wife's forgiveness and desire to stay with him as a means of improving his character. He proved that he wasn't genuine when he started writing letters to Danielle pretending to be a Southern woman speaking out for Chad and asking her to forgive him. The character claimed that her own husband had been sent to prison and, because she refused to forgive him, he ended up taking his life. She suggested that she forgive her own husband so the same thing didn't happen. But how would this random Southern woman know anything about Chad and Danielle's lives? Danielle wasn't fooled, and it only added more evidence that he was not the person she wanted to be with. Soon after, she stopped responding to any of his correspondence. Chad was charged with aggravated kidnapping and felony home invasion, and there was no way he was going to be acquitted at trial. He had confessed, and the evidence not only supported his confession, but it made him look even worse. In what seems like the first good decision Chad Schipper has ever made in his life, he pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced to 60 years to life in prison. At 42 years old, it's very unlikely that Chad will ever see freedom. Danielle divorced Chad, and her and the children changed their last name to Chauvet. It was her maiden name flipped upside down and backwards with part of a French word that means to save. To show just how much of a selfish narcissist Chad was, during the divorce he attempted to get custody of the children, despite being in prison. It obviously didn't work out. Danielle ended up reconnecting to her high school boyfriend, and the couple married in 2022, with him adding Chauvet to his own last name. Chad's own parents ended up filing a lawsuit against him for the $400,000 he had stolen, but it's unlikely they will ever see any of that money. Chad refused to admit he was a failure and stopped at nothing to try to dig himself out of debt. The problem is that you can't fix bad decisions with more bad decisions, and eventually it compounded until he decided to become a monster. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases and criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.